Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at a story that, on the surface might just seem like your run-of-the-mill family drama. But actually, it is a deep, truly fascinating psychological case study of toxic control and human insecurity. We're going to unpack the story of Anandi. She's a matriarch whose desperate, all-consuming need to control how she's perceived nearly destroys the exact family she's trying so hard to protect. Okay, let's dive into this. Consider what Anandi tells her maid right at the very start of our source material. She says, "Everything happens according to me. That's why I let no fights happen." On the surface, she's just boasting about the peace in her home, right? But psychologically, this totally arrogant opening quote reveals everything about her worldview. Anandi firmly believes that peace only exists through her absolute dictatorship. To her, strict obedience literally equals harmony. Any deviation from what she wants isn't just an annoyance, it is a direct threat to the family's survival and, more importantly, to her authority.
Chapter 1. The Empire of Ego. So before the real fireworks begin, Anandi rules her household with an iron grip. Her older daughter-in-law, Neelam, is completely submissive. She just endures these strict rules in absolute silence and fear. But as we know, a perfectly controlled empire is pretty fragile. The catalyst for our case study actually happens outside her home. A neighbor named Sumitra has a massive, highly public falling out with her own daughter-in-law, which results in that family officially splitting up. When Anandi sees this household fall apart, it plants a seed of intense, paralyzing insecurity in her mind. She becomes fiercely protective of her own ego. The fear of public humiliation, the fear of society laughing at her the exact way they're laughing at her neighbor, starts to completely dictate her actions from this point forward.
Chapter 2. The New Daughter-in-Law. And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict. When Anandi's younger son Neeraj marries his new wife Kajal, the dynamic shifts entirely. Think about the contrast here. You've got the older daughter-in-law, Neelam, who is traditional, quiet, and accepts Anandi's harsh rules without a peep. Then you have the new arrival, Kajal. Kajal is highly capable, she's modern, and she's extremely rational. When Anandi gives an unreasonable order, Kajal actually seeks fairness and tries to communicate. We can see exactly why Anandi felt instantly threatened by this modern mindset. Kajal isn't actively trying to be rebellious at all, but her mere existence as an independent thinker completely cracks Anandi's illusion of absolute control.
Because of this perceived threat, Anandi kicks off a calculated, step-by-step escalation of sabotage designed to basically break Kajal's spirit. Let's track this timeline, because it's wild. By day 2, Anandi deliberately throws away Kajal's first ceremonial meal just because she cooked a savory dish before a sweet one. By week 1, Anandi uses the maid to trick Kajal into cooking rice on a fasting day. This makes Kajal look totally incompetent and insensitive, which deeply upsets Kajal's husband, Neeraj. And by week 2, Anandi sends Kajal on a fake errand to a temple in the blistering heat. Meanwhile, Anandi puts her own phone on silent, making it look to the rest of the family like Kajal just wandered off irresponsibly. It is a systematic, relentless psychological campaign to alienate Kajal from her husband.
Chapter 3. Sabotage and Exposure. But Kajal is rational, remember? She realizes the math just isn't adding up. She decides she has had enough and sets out to uncover the truth behind all this sudden, localized household friction. Which brings us to this staggering number. 5,000. Kajal overhears a private conversation and discovers that 5,000 rupees was the exact monthly bribe Anandi was paying the maid, Kanchan. Let that sink in for a second. Anandi was literally funding her own family's chaos, paying the maid out of pocket to feed Kajal false information and manufacture conflict.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the incredible psychological gymnastics Anandi is pulling off here. Why on earth would a matriarch who desperately wants to keep her family together actively tear it apart? Well, she had convinced herself that because Kajal was quote-unquote modern, a family split was absolutely inevitable. Her twisted logic was that by framing Kajal now, she would save her own ego later. When the family eventually separated, the neighborhood would blame the terrible new daughter-in-law, and Anandi's reputation as a perfect mother would remain totally spotless. She was actively destroying her home just to save her public image. The tension finally snaps on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The whole family is sitting in the living room watching TV. Suddenly, Kajal walks in and boldly switches the TV off, declaring there is a massive problem.
Right on cue, the maid Kanchan arrives, her bags packed to leave for her village. But here comes the twist. Kanchan exposes the entire 5,000 rupee plot right there in front of everyone. Why? Because Kajal actually counter-bribed her. Kanchan bluntly states she was getting paid by Anandi to do wrong, but today she was paid by Kajal to tell the truth. Boom. In one swift, dramatic stroke, the conspiracy is laid completely bare. The family is just in absolute shock. And Anandi, completely cornered, breaks down and confesses. She says, "I didn't want the world to laugh at me, so I started making you look bad in everyone's eyes." It's pathetic, yes, but also deeply human. This wasn't born out of pure calculated malice or some genuine hatred for Kajal. It was born out of sheer, overwhelming insecurity. That absolute fear of being judged by society drove her to betray her own flesh and blood.
Chapter 4: The Power of Forgiveness.
The emotional damage is definitely done at this point. Neeraj, Anandi's son, is absolutely disgusted by his mother's actions. He immediately declares that he cannot live under a roof where his wife's dignity is attacked and where she's the victim of this malicious conspiracy. The heavy irony here is just staggering. Anandi's ultimate fear was her family splitting up, right? And now, that split is happening precisely because of her manipulative, paranoid efforts to prevent it. It is literally a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So, the crucial point is what happens next. Kajal actually steps in and stops her husband from packing his bags. She says, "It is my duty to prove that a daughter-in-law with modern thinking doesn't necessarily break a home." Instead of taking totally justified revenge, instead of just walking away from the woman who tortured her, Kajal chooses forgiveness. She demonstrates incredible emotional maturity, recognizing that Anandi was just acting out of fear. She actively chooses family unity over her own vindication. And this act of profound grace does what years of strict rules and toxic control never could. It completely shatters Anandi's ego. She realizes how spectacularly wrong she was. In tears, Anandi apologizes not just to Kajal, but also to Neelam, the older daughter-in-law she had mistreated in silence for years. She makes a real vow to stop forcing her will on everyone and to finally treat them as actual daughters, bringing genuine, unforced harmony to the household for the very first time. Which leaves us with this final thought for today's explainer. Look at the psychological journey we've just mapped out today. We went from a dictatorship built on a super fragile ego to a united front built on grace. It really forces us to ask, is true respect in a family, or really any group for that matter, born from absolute fear and control, or does it stem from understanding and forgiveness? It's a powerful psychological takeaway about the true nature of leadership, and definitely something I want you to think about as you navigate your own relationships. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what truly holds us together.